CBS Sports writer and a good friend, Dennis Dodd, joins the show. Dennis was down on the field and got to enjoy that. Dennis, did you get right after Rinaldi? You were in there awfully fast.
Yeah, right after Rinaldi and Holly Rowe. We just got in line. You got to stick your nose in there and try to get it.
That's right.
I had kind of had a relationship with Coach O, and we were able to do it.
Well, tell me about being down there on the field with the team. This is we'll kind of get to where they sit in the pantheon of college football, but gosh, that had to be a pretty insane locker room, post-game field, all of that stuff.
Yeah, it was. I didn't get paid, by the way, by Odell Beckham, but I wasn't that lucky. But yeah, it was crazy. I mean, it was more of a relief, I think, for LSU than anything, because so much had been made of this championship game and this run, where it was not only a title, it was for the people of Louisiana. It was to become, at least one of the all-time best. It was to, I don't know what the word is, but to vindicate Coach O's hiring and elevate him to a new plateau. And for all those players who, Patrick, you remember this, just 5 games into 2017, a lot of those players lost at home to Troy.
Yeah.
And then just a few years later, they're winning a national championship and going 15-0 is something else.
It was pretty insane. There's no doubt about it. And, you read a lot of the stories that were around, and it just seems like this LSU team never wavered in self-belief. You can go on confidence, bordering on cockiness, that kind of thing, but this just felt like a team that knew what it was getting into and knew that it was the better team on the field no matter who was across from them.
Well, it really started with the Texas game, in my opinion, where, look, say what you want about Texas now, that was, at the time, the biggest non-conference game of the season. 2 top 10 teams with all kinds of aspirations. LSU taking it on the road. And Coach O has referenced it more than once that he knew when they picked up that 3rd and 17 touchdown up by 7 late in the game, or not only scored a touchdown to go up 2 touchdowns again, but it was the call itself that came down from Ensminger that they were gonna go deep, and I think it was the Jamar, and I'm not sure, but
Jefferson.
But they did, and it turned out to be a 61-yard touchdown pass, and was the winning margin in the game. It turned out because Texas scored again. That, I think, gave them the belief. At least that's what Ed Orgeron has reflected in the past.
Yeah, it was Jefferson, by the way, who made the grab and run.
Yeah, okay, Jefferson. Yeah.
Speaking of, and that's kind of the interesting thing to me about this LSU team, and Dennis, you and I talked before the season. We talked kind of early in the season that, was this? We kept hearing rumors. You kept hearing, the scrimmages are closed at LSU. They're not showing off what they're doing. But you were hearing, the Jacob Hester, who's a friend and from Shreveport and is on the show before ours. You heard him talk about, hey, I watched some of this scrimmage stuff. You guys are not going to believe what they're doing. Orgeron came out and talked about how they completed 80% of their passes against their defense. Yep. Have we seen? I mean, you've been to the game longer than I have, Dennis, and I'm struggling to come up with a 1-year improvement, even if it's just for one side of the ball, even just the LSU offense, because the defense was kind of what it's always been. Have we ever seen anything like what happened in 1 year for LSU offensively?
Well, both as a team and as a player. Joe Burrow being a 57% passer and then winning the Heisman with those kinds of numbers. I mean, and strictly in terms of turnaround, not a championship, but Hawaii still holds the record. I think they went from 4-8 to 12-0 or something like that, but that's Hawaii in the Mountain West.
Right.
And in terms of numbers, that's the biggest turnaround. But no, what you're talking about is from it wasn't an also ran. It was just LSU was LSU. They weren't going to win the division, but they weren't going to be terrible. And then they went from that to being maybe the best single team ever in a single season. That debate can be had for years. And I'll have it with anybody. So no, I guess I don't remember anything like that.
Well, you mentioned an also ran. That's what LSU used to be. They ran and then they also ran. That was LSU's offense back in the day. Talking to Dennis Dodd from CBS. All right, let's have that discussion, Dennis, because it seems like when you talk to people, it's 95 Nebraska, it's 01 Miami, who had all the draft picks and all the NFL players. It's maybe an 03 type USC, an 05 Texas. And I'm sure there's some teams back in the 40s and 50s that were great, and the old Oklahoma dynasties and all that. Have we seen? How do you even quantify trying to compare this team to some of the great teams in the past?
Yeah, here's the tiebreaker. A Heisman Trophy winner. They became, I think, the second team to score 700 points in the modern era, and the only team to win more than 15 games, the most recent team to win more than 15 games was the University of Chicago in 1899, and they beat 4 high school teams. That ought to tell you something.
There you go.
And I think the biggest thing is 6, however you want to count it, 6 or 7 top 10 teams. Someone reminded me that the 71 Nebraska team, which is in that conversation too, that was the game of the century team that won at Oklahoma, played 3 top 10 teams all season. Since December 8th, LSU played 3 winner-go-home top 10 team games and won them all.
Yeah, their last 3.
6. Yep, that's right.
Yeah, it's interesting because – and, Dennis, this is where I struggle. And when people start talking about GOAT debates, greatest of all time debates, I struggle with this because it's incredibly difficult to compare different eras of any sport at any level because things change so much. And someone said, yeah, well, maybe one of the Notre Dame teams from the 40s was great, but, have LSU step off the bus in front of the 1945 Notre Dame team and watch them all die from fright.
Right.
It's difficult to me to be able to try to quantify or to try to figure out who the greatest of all time is when we don't have any way to compare eras.
No, we didn't. But everything else being the same in those eras, level of competition, scholarship limits, everything else, this has to be up there. Those Alabama teams of the 60s at least, did not have scholarship limits when they established that dynasty under Bear Bryant. Nebraska and Oklahoma had their run, but frankly, in the Big 8 was not facing the level of competition that the SEC did. One of the biggest things, and this may be going off track for a little bit, I think what we learned here, there was a transformational, well, Coach O, but a transformational thing about college football this year. It was the first time that I remembered that you couldn't sit there and say defense wins championships. This was the first team I can remember ever that could get on the field and say, we're going to outscore you. We don't care what it takes, but we're going to win. And if that defense isn't the quote-unquote worst of a national champion ever, it's one of them. And it was good. There were a lot of athletes, but it surrendered 21 points a game. We haven't even got to the Coach O factor.
Which, by the way, that's amazing when you consider one of the worst defenses in the championship of any championship team being a team that gives up 20 points a game. Like that's because Trevor Lawrence looked pedestrian against them, and they got as Dave Aranda mentioned, it was overcomplicated early. They threw a whole bunch of stuff out, simplified, played more base, and then they just played straight man and pretty much took care of business against Clemson and got a bunch of stops. But that's the era of college football we're in, right, Dennis, where I liken it to arena football. When I called arena football games, you may remember a wide receiver by the name of Pat Tilley, who played for the St. Louis Cardinals.
Sure.
Pat Tilley is from Shreveport.
He was down there, yeah.
He's from Shreveport. He was the original coach of the Bossier City Battle Wings, who were in the Arena Football 2 League. And one of the things he told me when we were first starting this thing is he said, I told my defensive coordinator, I need one stop a half. He said, and a stop just means anything but a touchdown, right? You hold him to a field goal, hold him to a field goal attempt, whatever. You give me one stop, and that's it, and I'll win because I'm going to score every time I have the ball. That's kind of where we are in college football, right? Where No longer is it about yardage. It's about just getting the ball back for your offense.
It's about breaking serve, for lack of a better term. If you break somebody's serve and hold them on a series, look what happened, and I'm not saying Oklahoma would have ever beaten LSU, but look at that pass interference play early in Oklahoma LSU. It was a blown call, absolutely a blown call. It's pass interference, against the LSU defender,
right.
And would have kept the offense on the field. I think it was 14-7 LSU at the time. They get the ball back, score, boom, it's over. But that was the kind of, LSU was able to hold serve because of that bad call, and it led to a rout. Again, not saying that LSU wouldn't have won the game.
Right. And it's interesting, though. You've been in this game a long time. You're as much of a historian of the game as anyone I know. Is this what we've seen in the last couple of years? Is this a tectonic shift in college football where it used to all be, hey, our defense holds you to 7 points and we're running the wishbone, to we're going to go out and score 50 and just, good luck trying to catch us?
It's been going on for about 15 years since the advent of the spread. And Phil Bennett told me this, and I had already come to this conclusion. The old defensive coordinator has been everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
I think he's basically retired now, but he said it used to be, holding a team under 14 or 10. Now the magic number is something like 24,
mm-hmm.
because everybody's going to score that much, and it's whatever number you can hold them under 24 that gives you a chance. And that's really the case when teams are averaging. Oh, I have to go back and look, but at the midway point, I think it was about 30 points per game per team. That's a lot. That's damn entertaining too, by the way.
Yeah, no doubt. And you see enough of it in the Big 12 where kind of you're a little bit somewhat in Big 12 country at this point. All right, let's move this thing forward now. Orgeron's got maybe one of the toughest jobs in America now, that basically his entire team and his entire coaching staff has left. I mean, everybody's gone.
Yeah.
He's got to piece it all back together. I said for a long time that the best recruiting he did was keeping Dave Aranda for the amount of time that he kept him. And then when he brought in Joe Brady, obviously that changed things around. Do you have any idea of what we might see with Orgeron and kind of what he looks like moving forward now that he's got to replace so many guys?
Yeah, I haven't even thought about guys that he's going to have to go get, because at least in terms of Joe Brady, that's the eclipse. That's the planets aligning once in a lifetime, where you get this guy who Joe Brady told me at the media day that he was doing everything but getting coffee, and he might have been doing that too. But had good reputation with Drew Brees and Sean Payton to be brought in to install an offense in a major college football team. Not only that, it succeeds wildly to the point that the quarterback wins the Heisman. That's asking a lot for an unknown to come in and do that. Whoever you're going to get is going to probably have to be a named guy who obviously runs the spread. And the same with Dave Aranda. You had $5 million worth of defensive coordinator on that field Monday night with Brent Venables. That's the kind of level we're talking about. And you're going to have to go get them, and they're going to have to succeed at a high level and be really good recruiters. I don't know how much Joe Brady recruited in a short time there, but you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And then to replace all that talent, the one thing is he's got dudes, and Coach O has recruited well. They're top 5 last 2 years. So if you got players, you got a chance.
No, he'll always have players. I don't think there's ever a doubt about that. He's an amazing recruiter, and the recruiting has gotten different for those guys. I guess maybe a month ago, just a random tight end from Georgia who's like I'm not a recruiting guy, Dennis. So some random tight end for Georgia who's the number 1 tight end in America just decommitted, I think, from Georgia and flipped to LSU because he liked what Thaddeus Moss was doing down at LSU. Exactly. I mean, the recruiting's different now for LSU. It's never been this way for the Tigers.
And I asked Ed Monday morning, what did Nick Saban do to get this team back on the national map? What did Les Miles do? And what did you do? Because Nick deserves credit. He closed the borders and got this thing going. Les deserves even more credit for it. It hardly fell down. They won a national championship and stayed competitive. And then, when it was Ed Orgeron's time, he picked up the baton and did it himself. And he just said continuity. What else are you going to say?
Yeah.
Everything went right at the right time. And then the question becomes, does LSU stay at this level? And I think they do. I think they, obviously a national program, but I think they stay competing for championships. But they've just taken so many hits. You're right. Last one out of Baton Rouge turned out to fight.
Yeah, it's been. I'm just curious who all got to go to the White House. Right, Aranda was being announced.
Who was left?
Yeah,
right,
and Aranda was being announced at Baylor. Joe Brady was off in Charlotte. Half the team had already committed to the draft. It's amazing, man. It's amazing. So what's your off season look like from here on, Dennis?
Oh gosh, I'm covering the AFC Championship game this weekend.
Well, you're close enough.
Here in Kansas City, so yeah, I'll be there for that. Hopefully get down at some point to chronicle what's going on in Mississippi, because that's going to be highly entertaining.
No doubt.
What else was I thinking of? Bobby Petrino. I don't know if anybody cares about Bobby Petrino anymore, but he's close. And it just seems kind of pathetic that he's taken another one of these jobs trying to rehab his image. And I don't know if anybody cares, but the SEC West itself is a story. Yeah, it's strong, but it's a small Fortune 500 conglomerate now with all the money being thrown around. So we'll see. The SEC continues to be at the center of the universe.
Dennis, if I might suggest an angle for your Bobby Petrino story.
Sure.
I think you should go do a profile on the Missouri State volleyball team.
Well, yeah, that would get more readers. Yeah, I think.
And I don't even know if you need to mention Petrino. I think you just do it as one troll job. As you just do here's a nice profile on the Missouri State volleyball team.
Oh, that's a great idea.
Thank you.
I might try that.
Thank
that's
you.
A good idea.
Dennis, you're the best, man. Have fun at the AFC title game, brother. And by the way, I've already had multiple people who are covering that game reach out and ask for barbecue recommendations in Kansas City, so I've been hooking them up.
Oh, you know the place is there. Yeah. You don't have to be told.
No, absolutely. Dennis, hey, enjoy yourself, man.
All right, man. Thanks, Patrick.
Dennis Dodd, CBS Sports.